So, I recently, as in yesterday, or I guess this morning, woke up with basically what I would equate to a breakthrough in, if not wavelength theory proper, one of the ancillary functions of wavelength theory in a way that I could use to more properly express what it is, define it more, and make it so that it is something that is approachable by the rest of humanity that doesn't see things from the way that my brain works. Because, not that many people are inside my head, just kind of me. Anyway, let me go over what I wrote down real quick and see if I can't summarily summarize. The concept that I was going to be trying to define is what it basically told me that it was called short think. It was defined as more or less pre-recorded messages in the form of single words. So you could see a word in a context and use it to trigger the cliff notes that I had previously discussed. Because my mind basically creates shortcuts. I guess shortcut would probably be a better word than cliff note, less copywritten as well. But what you would do is say, in the dream I was looking at a piece of paper and I basically interpreted it as like the future. Not the paper itself, that is, as the future, but I interpreted the dream as a vision into the future. It may not be, obviously, but I figured it was a what could be if things continue on this current path. And then I would look at individual words written on the paper, and it was basically like using free word association, but instead of the opposite word that my brain typically goes to, those words that they would normally go to were reset and placed as trigger words that would lead to specific memories. So, say that you had basically a flashbulb memory, which is a memory that, in layman's terms, is something that usually is created by a stressful event or an important event in your life. If we could trigger this mechanism manually, which I think we can, you could then force a flashbulb memory. Now, if you can create a memory with the intensity of a flashbulb memory on purpose by absorbing excess data, you could then more or less have every human in existence, or at least everyone who has access to wavelength theory, able to have photographic memory triggerable. So, in essence, you would raise the intelligence floor of humanity. And then, say, if we could have everyone able to do that, what would you do with it? Well, theoretically, you could then create, you could overwrite previously existing memories if you would need to. This is not necessarily necessary, but you could theoretically overwrite previously stressful memories that are no longer useful to you, because memory is useful insofar as it still has emotion tied to it. After an emotional connection is finished with the memory, you've internalized it enough to the point that it is no longer useful to you, and it's basically just kind of taking up space in your memory. I don't think it's possible for, if you lose that memory, for it to no longer be internalized. You might not have a reason why you know to do what you know not to do. You could just call it intuition at that point. But But once your emotional connection to an event is severed completely, it's as internalized as it gets, and that means that you are prepared for the future that had set you up for avoiding the situation that you were in previously, which is why it's kind of useless to have something, say, like a party in 5th grade or your first birthday party or an event that was outside of your control, and then just being a slave to it for the rest of your life. Anyway, I feel like I'm getting sidetracked. But yeah, you could overwrite those memories if you were able to have full access over your memory, which I believe we can using this wavelength theory type thing. And you could then write what is meaningful more efficiently. You could essentially force yourself to learn things. And then you set yourself up these code words, these triggers, to bring that memory flooding back. So when I study, I tend to study with a very specific set of music for very specific subjects, which can be a problem because then I also am like, well, I can't take this test unless I have this music on. So that's because I'm primarily an auditory learner, but I'm trying to learn to overcome that. Anyway, say you can realize in the middle of having an incredible experience that you want to remember that experience as well as you possibly can. And you are then able to trigger the mechanism to create a flashbulb memory. So you create an artificial flashbulb memory by absorbing additional data from your surroundings. Side note here that I had put in the text, in a hope to be able to read memories later through some computer-like apparatus that'll be part of wavelength theory 2. I had theorized that eventually the data of a brain will be something that we can analyze and rewrite, very much similar to the way we write a hard drive. Whether or not that's ethical is a question for another day. It definitely isn't, but whether or not it's possible, I believe, should be something that could be proven. Anyway, then you think of the memory you want to replace, say some trauma that you were trying to forget, and your therapist says it's fine to delete because you've internalized it, like I was mentioning earlier. Or some memory your brain clings to that is useless, like a jingle, like you know how you always have old jingles from like advertisements. Like I still know the Empire advertisement. I think everyone does who had ever heard it at this point. Alright, let me just continue my notes. I'm not sure if this is going to make sense at this point, because this is mostly my section for me, so that I can end up working on this in the future, rather than having other people necessarily able to understand this. Eventually, if this thing is a provable truth, everyone will be able to understand what I'm trying to say here is the point. But in the meantime, this is side notes for me. I am simply a medium for wavelength theory to self-author its autobiography. But if this is a thing I can prove, it'll not only make me filthy rich, so I can follow my dream of getting all the people who I care about to live comfortably so they can self-actualize as well, but it'll further mankind as a whole. Since I'm not in the position on the hierarchy of needs to self-actualize, these artificial flashbulb memories that I've been able to create have been temporary glimpses into self-actualization, and I've had to push myself to my physical, mental, and emotional, and I guess you could even argue spiritual limits for this research. I do not necessarily think this research, or the way that I have been involved in this research, is necessarily safe for other people, but in the text I refer to there needing to be keystones and a host. Well, I believe myself to be that host. So